My name is Bubs, I'm an artist, and I like to hear myself talk, and today...
Ugh, that was weird. Whew. I do feel a lot better, though. Alright, let's just take it from the top. Hello, my name is Bubs, I'm an artist, and I like to hear myself talk, and today I'd like to hear myself talk about art tropes that really get on my nerves. Of course, this isn't the first time I've done this, but it will be a better time that I've done this. Pretend that sentence sounded good. I've actually been working on the script for a while because I realized I had more to talk about. Shocking, right? I had more to say about a given subject. Perish the thought. Still, there really are so many common things in writing and design and all that where, while I can understand why it's kind of a default for lots of projects, I am still completely exhausted on the concept. Like, it's not a moral affront to God or anything, but it does displease my sensibilities, and what better way to handle my annoyance and discomfort than to yap about it on the internet? Isn't that what it's for? As a heads up, for this video, this particular batch of tropes are more about story stuff rather than strictly visual art tropes. I don't know if that matters to you, but the title could have led you to believe a different reality, so I want to clarify in case it does. Still, if you think about it, art is actually a very broad term which does include writing, so it isn't false advertising simply for the sake of having a consistent title scheme, and you can't be mad at me. Or, I guess you can, but that would be a little silly of you, to be honest. Speaking of people being silly and getting mad at me, I have a disclaimer. If you're a returning viewer, you probably don't need to hear this, but if you're new around these here parts, firstly, hi, hello, welcome, and secondly, the people that were here last time were naughty, so now I'm obligated to say the following. Everything in this video is my opinion. I will provide examples of what I'm talking about and explain my reasoning for my opinions. This is not equivalent to me saying that the pieces of media from which I pull examples are terrible, especially since I often pull from things that I really love. It is also not equivalent to me stating my reasoning as objective fact that should be true for everyone. I am only stating what I know is true for me as an individual. This video would be entirely pointless if I were to say, I don't like when people do this thing, and then provide no examples or explanation. That's a list, not a discussion or critique. And if a list is what you're here for, then just read the video chapter titles and then you can leave, I guess. Also, please keep in mind that just because I don't personally like something existing as a trope doesn't mean I think it can never be interesting in any context, or even that the trope itself is bad practice across the board. If you like the trope, that's great. If you have seen the trope done in an interesting way and want to tell me about it in the comments, that's also great. If you've written a story yourself that has done something like what I talk about here, that's the most great. Good on you for writing a story. So what if it includes one or two details that I don't personally enjoy? If you find a critique I have here valuable and you want to incorporate a change into your work, that's fine, but you should not completely switch up your view on anything just because I offered an opposing view. I am an internet stranger, and therefore should not shape the way you view the world all by myself, especially if it takes away from your fun. At the end of the day, this is all for the sake of fun for you and for me, and if there is a chance that this will make you upset, I encourage you to leave. You can come back some other time. You will not hurt my feelings. There. Now that's all out of the way, let us boogie right along to our very first trope, shall we?
Brains.
Okay, I know I'm starting off in a really odd place, but please, hear me out. While there is plenty of zombie-related media that I either currently enjoy or otherwise got a lot of enjoyment out of before the writers gave up, as a concept, zombie apocalypse is just kind of lame to me. Don't get me wrong, the idea of zombies is really cool from a narrative perspective. These monsters are people twisted into lifeless husks that will turn on their loved ones and fellow man with animalistic rage, acting on the whims of a virus or sometimes fungus that exists only to replicate. That is a chilling concept, especially if the reason for it is unknown and or invisible. Still, I cannot get over how unrealistic the concept is. I won't beat a dead horse. The internet has already discussed many times over that a bag of decaying meat shambling through a hot Georgia summer would turn into a smelly goo pile long before Coral's little sister managed to unlock the speech skill tree. But I pose to you what I feel is a much more compelling argument. Weapons. Maybe you can convince me that something about whatever is creating the zombies is able to keep them from decaying, and after watching how people reacted in 2020 to a certain virus, I can definitely be convinced that lots of people would become zombies if for no other reason than ignoring the advice of medical professionals, government officials, and also common sense. What I cannot be convinced of is that zombies would pose any kind of threat that could not be solved with humanity's proclivity for creating instruments of mass destruction. I am absolutely not posing the argument here that there could never be a truly devastating zombie-related event that results in mass casualties, especially in conjunction with these instruments of mass destruction, and the consequences could be devastating on a global scale, but zombies shutting down the entire world? Unless it is set way in the past, I think it is pretty reasonable to assume news of some freaks popping out of the graveyard will get out there before too much damage is done, especially considering that most of the time you can put that thing back to sleep if you just smack its head hard enough with a blunt object. I mean, I personally grew up taking those suckers out with garden plants, so... I do understand that this is probably bias, born of growing up in a country with quote-unquote intruder drills at school, but come on, find a firearm, a hunting crossbow, maybe throw a can of beans at its skull, that might work. If all that requires a little too much precision, vehicular manslaughter could be a viable strategy. If an entire city is overrun, engage bomb strategy. I feel like, realistically, we could take care of zombies faster than they'd be able to turn folks. Zombies, to my knowledge, cannot self-replicate. I've yet to see a zombaby, and I don't know that they'd be capable of mitosis. So if you stop letting people turn, you run out of zombies. Boom. End of the world never happens. I am, of course, oversimplifying and generalizing things here. There are many story reasons that you can add to your world building that gets around the believability problems above. Maybe everyone is infected and the illness only activates when you kick the bucket, so there's always a danger. Maybe the government was doing evil bioengineering and they're intentionally covering up information to cover their hides, and also see how this all works out. Maybe zombies are not actually a fictional concept already, and so no one has any idea what this could be. Take into account that the enemy would be your coworkers, neighbors, family, and not some kind of wild animal or nameless monster, and now you're dealing with people very unwilling to pull the trigger. Plus, there's all that zombie media that buffs the zombies so that they're actually more effective threats than they would have been while alive, turning them into spore spewers or acid spitters, which actually does catch my interest a little more than your average zombie affair. Still, I have my doubts that global reaction time would be slow enough that zombies would be able to end human civilization as we know it. I think I'd be less convinced that a zombie apocalypse is not really possible if it wasn't for the fact that the genre relies very heavily on living humans to maintain the threat, specifically by being stupid as hell or evil as hell. I get that it's realistic that if the world went to shit, humanity will be its own worst enemy. There would be a brutal competition for scarce resources, and some people just suck. That's just how the cookie crumbles. Still, when zombies are supposed to be scary, it's a little goofy that after the initial, zombies kind of panic subsides, zombies rarely get kills unless people are actively ignoring the precautions that they have already learned not to ignore. I guess people dying to stupidity in horror or horror-adjacent media isn't exactly unique to zombies, but still, individual zombies are rarely much of a threat and won't end up racking up victim after victim like the still living humans. I mean, come on, if you're anything like me and had a neglectfully permissive parent that allowed you to watch the Resident Evil films as a child, the stuff that stuck with you is everything that went down inside the spooky government facility, specifically that shit with the lasers, and also how hot Mila Jovovich is. And that one even has cool zombies. When people ask you what the scariest forces are in The Walking Dead, nobody thinks of the namesake of the show, they think of these motherfuckers. Rightly so, but unlike in Resident Evil, neither of these goons even had anything to do with why the zombie apocalypse even started. They're just capitalizing on what's already happened. Just really internalize that the most iconic and scary things within The Walking Dead stopped being The Walking Dead after, season 4. Side note, I'd like to start a petition for Jeffrey Dean Morgan to stop being really scary and really mean to Steven Yeun during season finales of shows. It's only happened twice now, to my knowledge, but Doofenshmirtz meme. Secondary side note, the amount of crossover from the Walking Dead and Invincible cast is absolutely silly. They've even started to borrow from other AMC shows recently. And Michael Mouse is there. Now, before you argue that they're actual characters and therefore it's an unfair comparison, Yeah, I'll agree that it's a bit of an uneven playing field, but that's actually another issue I have with the genre and not a reason for me to be more charitable to it. Unless we're dealing with the zombie of an allied character that we've already gotten to know, there's rarely all that much to dig into. They're all just nameless and faceless bags of meat after a while. Very morbid, but it's how it goes. I think maybe my main issue with zombies is that they have an expiration date. Not just because they're actively rotting. No, I mean more in a horror sense. The thing about horror is that it relies on things being unexpected. Surprising. If you know your enemy, the fear factor comes down a lot, and zombies are, unfortunately, pretty damn predictable by nature. Unless we're dealing with some modified zombies, we're up against corpses that don't grow, or adapt, or learn. They don't change tactics, and they have one goal, which also means that generally speaking, the threat level of zombies is entirely dependent on catching the victim off guard. As such, once your guard is high enough, and you've learned all of what they can do, the threat is gone, and then zombies are just kind of a backdrop. They become relegated to a weapon used by other threats, maybe an obstacle akin to a natural disaster rather than any kind of active entity, and at that point, I'm not sure why they're even here still. If you want to tell a story about the after-apocalypse, why still have hordes of the undead? So I can be disappointed if a character dies what is now the lame way? If I'm gonna suspend my disbelief and buy into something that will wipe out the human race, I'd rather do it for a concept that feels a bit more actively terrifying in the long term, both in story and in visuals. Intelligent life from another planet wishing to conquer ours, eldritch cosmic terrors from beyond the stars that wish to eat our minds, demon armies from hell waging war against holy creation, some kind of terrifying animal species we've poked the nest of, a secret race of mole people but hate the surface dwellers for potentially valid reasons. Sure. Maybe that stuff will feel a little less grounded in reality. There are plenty of viruses capable of hijacking people's nervous systems that actually exist, whereas I'm not sure on Cthulhu yet. Still, I think any of those are just a more interesting vessel to explore an apocalyptic event with. But hey, I still love Glenn and Abraham. Yes, the start of Season 7 was a bad day for me, and Clem, and Kenny, and Lee, and I will never be tired of my tank to Shrek conversion mod for Left 4 Dead 2. Enough about zombies, though. On to the next trope.
You poor, ugly thing, you.
Just kidding, I lied. It's called Action Time. If you've enjoyed listening to my yapping so far, I'd really appreciate if you'd drop a like, maybe consider subscribing if you want to see more from me. That interaction is free for you, but it helps me out a ton. It shows YouTube that the content I'm making is resonating with people, and that means more people get to see it, and that means I get more opportunity to make stuff in the future. Plus, if I slander one of your comfort shows later, you can always revoke those interactions as punishment, so what's really the harm? Okay, back to the topic at hand. Before I get into this section, really quick, I'm going to be using terms like pretty and ugly and hot and not hot as a stand-in for conventionally attractive and not conventionally attractive. It is just for the sake of brevity that I chose to do this, but I want to make it very clear I am not saying that any of the features that I'm going to be talking about or any of the people that I'm going to be talking about are objectively ugly or pretty or whatever. I should hope that it will be clear that that is my standpoint based on the way that I'm going to conduct the discussion in this section. Still, just in case, want to make that clear, not here to insult anybody or hurt anybody's feelings. Cool. Anyway. If I sat down and really racked my brain, I'm actually pretty confident that I could come up with at least 100 different instances of hero and villain pairs where the hero is hot and the villain is not. It happens in and out of live action, though I feel the trope is more easily identifiable in cartoony media or even narration-based media like books. And every time it happens, it's probably one of the least challenging things that a story can do. Granted, not every story needs to be challenging, but I get a lot more value out of art that actually tries to make me think a little bit, I guess. Now, obviously, I understand why this is done. Character design is storytelling, and making a character either appealing or unappealing to look at can act as a powerful visual indicator of whether you should like them or not. I also don't exactly mind how often the villain characters who look conventionally unattractive look that way because of their evil. They could be monstrous or haggard because they've been corrupted by dark magic or something else along that same vein. It's not an inherently bad idea, however, I just think it's kind of worn out storytelling device. For ages, media has taught the average person that being conventionally attractive has lots to do with how good of a person you are. Disney and Pixar are chock full of examples of the pretty hero and ugly villain pairing. Ariel versus Ursula, Aladdin versus Jafar, Tiana versus Facilier, Hercules versus Hades, Bob versus Syndrome, the Queen of Hearts versus Alice. Despite the fact that I'd be down to clown with plenty of the villains I just listed, don't you dare judge me, it is very easy to see that, at least from a comparative standpoint, the protagonists get the lion's share of conventionally attractive features. The comparison can also be seen in things like in how Kronk gets a chance to redeem himself while the far less conventionally attractive Yzma is just purely and unchangeably evil. And, of course, this is just one media conglomerate. There are countless examples once you start to look out at the vast expanse of movies, shows, books, comics. Time and time again, hot equals good, ugly equals bad, and it's just stale. It's also just weird to teach your audience that with scars and deformity and differences tends to come a lower moral character, and it's a crappy message no matter how old your audience happens to be. It's just as bad when Arcane does this than when fucking My Little Pony does it. You might rebut this with proposing the idea that, well, there's lots of media, animated or otherwise, that flips this idea on its head, so there's definitely a counter-trope of sorts. And honestly, fair point. There is a lot of media that attempts to subvert the trope, but frankly, I'm also kind of annoyed of that too. Maybe not for the reason you'd think. That sort of media, when the protagonist is kinda on the ugly side, when the villain is closer to being conventionally attractive, tends to feature physical appearance as a major plot point. The stories featuring the ugly good guys is often a story about how you shouldn't judge based on appearances, such as Shrek or Hunchback, or is otherwise about the ugly good guy finding a way to fix their ugliness, like in Beauty and the Beast. In media where the villain is pretty, it's oftentimes something that, once again, factors into the narrative. Their beauty is something they gain from villainy when they'd otherwise be conventionally unattractive, such as Entangled. Or their beauty is something they use to do evil deeds, like insert any sort of lust demon. As much as I absolutely adore K-pop demon hunters, it even does this to a certain extent. Obviously, huntress are beautiful, I'm not calling them ugly, but all of the demons are hideous beasts except for the ones that need to be hot in order to manipulate the masses. I can fully acknowledge that this has a lot to do with the fact that it's drawing from actual mythology, but it still does exemplify what I'm talking about here. In other words, the characters aren't allowed to just look the way they look unless it's the same default hot hero and ugly villain combo. The bigger issue for both the trope and its subversion, however, is how it's pushing an objective difference between attractive and unattractive. Not to be the friend that's too woke, but I think it's pretty screwed up to perpetuate the idea that certain features are just inherently ugly or inherently pretty. Attractiveness is completely subjective. Don't listen to the weirdos that try to push this idea that there's some kind of instinctual reason as to why certain features or personality traits are more or less attractive, especially if they claim to have gotten laid at some point. That claim disproves their point. Their aura should instinctively activate a fight or flight response. Sure, there are some trends in things that people might find more commonly attractive, and they could do with instinct, but all it takes is cracking open a history book to see how much beauty standards change and warp over time, and the variation continues as you look at all the different standards within individual cultures from around the world. I also really hate how this continues a trend of what I like to call average erasure. No matter what kind of media you look at, important characters are most often hot or ugly. Rarely are we treated to people that are just average, which is stupid because the vast majority of people just look somewhere in the middle of the proposed extremes, existing as a mishmash of traits that are highly favored and not so highly favored by society, because human DNA isn't concerned about making people supermodels. I hope I've already made this clear by the examples I've been using, but I wish to make it known that this isn't a thing that only existed in old Disney movies. I have seen others online discuss this concept before and kind of push this argument that media nowadays is just so much better, and sure, it might be better, but it's not like the concept has gone away completely. Again, refer to Arcane, refer to K-pop demon hunters, look at many modern anime shows like Den and Jujutsu Kaisen, and what I really want to address right now, refer to a lot of popular modern-day romance comics and books. In my opinion, one of the worst manifestations of this trope is something that happens in a lot of recent romance titles, specifically lingering in that dark romance space. A genre title I have many issues with, but that's a different topic for a different day. I have read far too many comics and listened to far too many book reviews where the female protagonist suffers victimization from two very similarly behaving men, but the perception on the actions changes depending on whether or not the character performing them is conventionally attractive. When the short, fat old man touches her hair without consent, it's creepy, but when the muscular, tall, well-groomed man does the same thing, it's hot and creates tension that the reader is supposed to invest in and hope to see more of. This is truly the trope at its worst, as the person you are meant to root for isn't even a better person this time, they're just hotter. I should hope that I don't have to explain why this is a problem, especially when the activities in question are significantly more traumatic than touching hair. The attractiveness of a person should have no bearing on whether or not we perceive their abusive actions as abusive. I know this is unfortunately a thing that happens in real life. I'm just saying though, maybe if we didn't feed into this as much in our media, it would happen a little less. Now, considering I have stated that I'd rather see less of the trope in practice, but also have issues with the reverse situation happening, you might be wondering what I could possibly propose as a solution. What would please me if someone were looking to do so? It's actually very simple, and that's just to not engage with the dichotomy at all. Don't break people up into categories of hot and not, just make people with all kinds of different features that humans can have in real life. Allow your characters to have imperfections and desirable traits, no matter whether or not you're supposed to like them, and let the audience decide who's hot and who's not. After how my audiences behave towards my elderly asexual priest character, I've learned you have no real control over that anyways. I'm not saying you can't make conventionally attractive or conventionally unattractive characters, because that would be absolutely stupid, but treating attractiveness like a team sport is just not necessary. Some pieces of media that I really like and dodge this trope pretty well are the Owl House, Gravity Falls, both Castlevania series, Invincible, and even Clone High of all things. I'd give live action examples, but that would require basically labeling real humans as average looking or even unattractive, and that's not really something I'm about, so what I'm trying to say is that I'm not asking for the impossible here. It is in fact possible to make me happy. I think I've yapped enough on this one. On to the next.
Guys, Vegetalo killed my entire family.
The title of this trope is a reference to the great and mighty Sung-Won Cho, who made a skit on his YouTube channel about this very phenomenon. This "we forgive you" business is that thing where the super duper bad guy of the story gets redeemed. Except not really, we just decided we don't hate him anymore for plot convenience. Don't get me wrong, I am a sucker for a redemption arc. I love watching a character challenge their morals and ideals of their own volition, and work hard to make amends with those that they've hurt. I am also a huge fan of when there is a temporary setting aside of differences for the sake of defeating an even bigger bad, and we all exit the confrontation knowing that neither party considers this to be a complete absolution of any bad blood, with perhaps a proper redemption taking place after the fact. But this trope isn't either of those things. This trope is, we sang a little song and now we're all good, or, well, he said he's on our side now, or the dreaded, they were actually just lashing out at us because of their trauma. It is instantaneous, or close to that, and rather than showing the villain actually growing and adapting as a person over time, everyone seems to just have amnesia regarding all of the bullshit this guy inflicted on them. There are countless reasons why I hate this from a narrative perspective, but to start with a main reason, I despise how this robs the villain of a real redemption arc. As I said before, the reason I like to witness redemption arcs is because of the internal struggles that you get to see them go through. The growth is the cool part. However, when this happens, there's no growth because we don't see them struggle and improve over time. We didn't see them try to make amends for what they did. The supposed internal shift happens all at once and therefore is completely superficial. Did they actually have a spontaneous change of heart, or did they just get backed into a corner? Sure, there are cases where the initial forgiveness is super rushed, but then the character continues to prove themselves over and over after the fact. But that still doesn't make it believable to me that the characters would extend that forgiveness in the first place, at least in most cases. You have some practically infinite wellsprings of forgiveness in certain medias, or characters with a long history with that villain, but it is rare that everyone is on the same page with that one person, so it doesn't make sense for them to grab that olive branch too. Also, in situations where there's one person who's more willing to forgive than the others, I loathe how frequently that's a betrayal to their friends. Obviously, sometimes it makes sense as to why they're waving the white flag, but other times it's just so shitty. How could you be choosing the guy that murdered my mom over me right now? What, 'cause y'all are lesbian lovers? Too bad, your lesbian lover killed my mom. Find a different one. Speaking of, this trope usually ruins the protagonist too, not just the villains. Like, in a lot of cases, you are dealing with people that have caused incredible trauma. They killed people that the protagonists cared about. They violated and assaulted the protagonists. But because it is now plot convenient, they are expected to have switched sides based on basically nothing. And the characters that we as the audience were led to believe have emotions that we as the audience are supposed to take seriously just seem to change completely because they've got to for the plot. If you have good characterization up to that point, and your good guys feel real, this stuff can really hurt that. At best, it feels like any kind of strong conviction or sense of morality that these characters previously possessed was entirely dependent on convenience, and at worst, you get characters that stop acting like people and start acting like vessels for a story. Which they ultimately are, but good writing should prevent the viewer from feeling that. I'm sorry, even if you have the saddest backstory in the world, and even if there was a time when I was really close to you, I'm still not gonna set my differences with you aside if you commit terrorism against me and in the process kill many of my friends and family. In fact, I think our history as friends will make me even less likely to open my door for you, because why on earth would I give you the opportunity to betray me again? One of the most egregious examples of this trope, at least in my mind, comes from Steven Universe. Massive Steven Universe spoilers incoming. Skip to here, this timestamp, if you haven't watched it and you don't want the spoilers. This is an example that makes me so upset because Steven Universe manages to perfectly execute realistic character growth and redemption arcs over and over again, proving that the show is more than capable of it, and then it turns around and massively fumbles other situations. And yes, I do mean perfectly executed. Steven Universe gets a lot of criticism for being overly dramatic and sloppily written at times, and while I do actually think some of that is valid, the common critique of it being one of those la la, we are best friends now types of shows just doesn't hold water for me. Unless you're going in with the incorrect mindset that musicals are lame, it makes sense when and where the songs do the trick. However, they really dropped the most important ball. If you watched the show and have consumed any media about the finale, I am sure that you know I'm talking about the diamonds. While I think the finale gets a lot more flack than it really deserves in some aspects, especially considering how rushed it was behind the scenes, the decision to redeem the diamonds by trying to paint them as victims of a toxic family dynamic is absolutely stupid. To my knowledge, there has been no indication that the diamonds were created by some other being which forced them all to be perfect. At least it's not been indicated in the actual show or the movie. Maybe it's in an art book or something, but you don't get the brownie points for your show being well written and deep if I need to get supplemental materials to understand it. That's not how that works. Maybe when Lars of the Stars comes out, I'll eat crow on this, but even if we operated under the assumption that there was some other being that hurt them, they decided to permeate their pain amongst each other and all of Gemkind for thousands of years after that influence was gone. They didn't need to do that, especially not for thousands of years. It's only more annoying that the resolution for their thousands of years of torment boils down to the reincarnation of their dead sister going, "Knock it off." While all of that alone is a very weak attempt at redeeming anybody, the quality of the attempt doesn't really matter in this case because, oh my god, they are fascist intergalactic colonizers! They have canonically destroyed countless planets, many of them already populated with living beings before they came in to colonize the place. The reason for destroying these planets is, of course, to grow their empire that, as far as the show will tell us, only exists to continue growing. Like a plague. Insert images of the injectors that just so happen to bear a striking similarity to bacteriophages. They perpetuate a culture that exists only to glorify the Empire, and more importantly, glorify themselves. Why glorify them? Because Invader Zim rules, I guess. And if anyone steps up and requests to express a unique thought or idea, or maybe just makes a mistake one single time, they are shattered into fragments to be recycled or maybe forcibly fused together in unholy experiments. Other options for dissenters include having their memories erased so that they'll return to their duties willingly, having their minds and bodies corrupted until they turn into aimless mutated beasts, or even just straight up getting mind controlled. They literally made races of people explicitly for the purpose of being racist. I don't know what more I even have to say than that. It's not an oopsie. That is a continuous calculated series of ethics violations that they spent tens of thousands of years doing. It's not even that it's unbelievable that anyone would be willing to forgive them. It's straight up impossible. It is not enough to take a little bath with everybody. It is not enough to say you'll do better from now on, and it's not enough to know that you guys were running your universe-spanning slave state as such because you were all being too hard on yourselves. There's nothing you can do to make up for that besides going away forever. You don't deserve to lead anyone if a middle schooler has to tell you that using an unholy amalgam of the corpses of your enemies to destroy a planet with intelligent life on it out of spite is not a thing you should do. This section ended up turning into a Steven Universe rant a little bit. I guess it's just been on my mind because of the upcoming spin-off series, which I will be watching because I love Lars and was sad that his space pirate content was cut from the original series, even if I wish Cartoon Network would start investing in new ideas or series that didn't really get a chance to go as far as it could have, like OKKO. Really though, I truly cannot think of a worse presentation of this particular trope. I'll be interested to see if you have some worse examples in the comments, though, you know, please give spoiler warnings if they're needed. I do like to check out the stuff you guys talk about, and I like going in blind. Let's not spoil the ending of another anime for me. Or others in the comments, please. Anyways, at best, this trope is just lazy writing with kind of irresponsible messaging, and at worst, it can single-handedly ruin an otherwise fantastic story while also treating victims of abuse as beings without agency and therefore undeserving of consequence. Which is a recipe for real-life harm in many ways. Unlike the previous thing, I don't really know a way that something like this could be good outside of maybe comedic settings, but I'm willing to be proven wrong if anyone wants to try. However, for now, I shall move on to my next trope.
Who are you?
This is basically just an offshoot of the previous trope, but I do think it's kind of its own thing. Here, I'm talking about when a character, either previously evil or previously mostly a side character, receives an immense amount of attention in the writer's room moments before they die. You've seen it before, I'm sure. First things first, this is just lazy writing again. I get it. Sometimes there's just been no time to actually develop a character properly before the moment where you plan to kill them. Or a self-sacrificing moment is the best way to redeem a villain character. But 9 times out of 10, this feels like just a shortcut to try and add in some emotional depth to a character so that their death feels more meaningful. Though this frequently backfires in my experience. In many instances, the sudden development of a previously undeveloped character is an obvious red flag that something terrible is about to happen to them, which takes all of the shock out of it. I also tend to get extremely annoyed at surrounding characters for mourning the dead guy that I don't even remember them holding a conversation with previously, or, in some cases, watched them repeatedly bully or dismiss. No, I do not buy that you'd actually mourn this fool. One of the worst offenders here is The Walking Dead show. Yes, we're bringing it back again. And this trend was one of several reasons I gave up watching after season 8 when I realized season 7 was a fluke, because it was exhausting. Many of the main characters at a certain point obtain some crazy plot armor, so what they do very often to make the universe still feel like it was dangerous is take a very minor character that may or may not have even had lines previously, suddenly give them a role and a purpose within the show for an episode, only to immediately kill them that same episode. How touching and emotionally impactful of you, Walking Dead show. Thank you so much. The second thing I don't like about this trope is that it very rarely makes sense, at least for the villainous types of characters that get subjected to this. When we're dealing with a villain that is killed as a means to defeat them, I never understand what I'm supposed to get out of being told their backstory right before their fate. I have to imagine it's for the melodrama again, but this time it doesn't even make sense. You're not rushing to give them some endearing personality traits or character motivations right before they die, you're just giving me a lore drop that rarely has anything to do with what's happening right now. Telling me someone had a shitty childhood or a dead wife doesn't actually change my mind on whether or not I think it's okay to do war crimes, because experiencing trauma doesn't mean you get to go out of your way to give other people trauma. Refer to the previous video chapter for more details. I would argue that this actually reduces the emotional impact of the villain's defeat, because rather than cheering that the bastard is finally dead, I'm just sitting there feeling awkward and unsatisfied as the creators of the story really try to push the idea that I'm supposed to be sad. The other form of this thing, where the villain dies willingly as a way to save others, also leaves me kind of confused with a bad taste in my mouth. Just like how I left your mom last night. I'm very sorry, but not sorry enough to remove the joke from my script. If a character has spent the entire story dedicated to torturing people, killing people, taking advantage of people in all the worst ways, just generally demonstrating a complete lack of empathy and care for their fellow man, I cannot be convinced that they'd want to sacrifice their lives. The ultimate selfless act, without a lot of personal growth beforehand. One little conversation and a shocked and introspective facial expression isn't gonna do it for me, Chief, with or without the montage of the villain growing up and experiencing the joy of being alive or whatever. I'd much more easily buy into the idea that they would be happiest seeing the world burn with them in it. At least that way they'd be alive to laugh at the ship while it goes down. Don't get me wrong, I don't actually despise the concept of a morally dark or gray character sacrificing their lives in the effort to save the hero or the world or whatever. I mean, I have characters of my own whose fate is exactly that. The ultimate sacrifice can be a really fitting conclusion to a redemption arc and or pretty much the only way that a character could truly begin to make amends for the things that they've done. But in those instances, there is at least time dedicated to proving that the character has had a change of heart or has been shown previously to be a morally complex individual, and that they'd be actually willing to do the right thing even if it means the wrong decision for them. That is not the case with these types of stories. With these types of stories, much like the instant forgiveness thing, a switch just seems to flip and then the bad guy will rush in to save the day, and it only burns my ass more when the thing the bad guy is stopping is something the bad guy literally caused. Like, oh no, I must stay behind in the detonating facility to stop the mega explosion that I tried to set off, but I can just hack the mainframe in time. I can contain the explosion to my exact location. Dude, if you're really that changed inside, why are you trying to set off the mega explosion in the first place, huh? Seems a little short-sighted if you were having doubts. Unless, of course, you weren't having doubts, and then we're back on me not being able to believe that you'd ever do this in a million years. The entire trope is just so counterintuitive. Honestly, I think there is much more narrative value in killing a character we never got the chance to know, and I'm serious when I say that. Seeing a character we didn't get to spend time with or didn't learn much about get cut down out of nowhere is infinitely more tragic to me than getting a 10-minute canned backstory shoved down my throat before you throw the guy into the sun. As many gripes as I have with Attack on Titan, that is something I think it actually does very well. There are lots of characters that we truly never got the opportunity to understand before their lives were abruptly and cruelly cut short without warning. And this goes for enemies and allies, and that really elevated a lot of the themes that the show was going for in a brilliant way. I cannot imagine how obnoxious it would have been if we had to sit through clunky and ham-fisted expository dialogue before every character death just to try and ensure we'll be sad enough. Once again, I'm sure there are ways to lean into it for comedy and satire, but as is, this is just one of those things that I've never seen pulled off well. It's irritating over anything, really. Let's get on to number 5.
Senpai!
I'll be honest, I've never been a big fan of when a bunch of characters all clamor to romance one person, no matter the situation. Firstly, it usually only ever serves to generate extremely surface-level melodrama that stops being interesting the minute you turn 17, assuming it was ever interesting at any point before then. But secondly, it often assumes not only a default of monogamy, but proposes it as the only option. The object of desire is expected to choose a partner, as refusing to engage with this toxic situation and remain single is not allowed, but they are also expected to choose only one partner when the person may have concurrent affections for multiple people. It's just a little weird. That being said, I think it's pretty believable in a lot of circumstances from a writing standpoint, at the very least. It stands to reason that someone who is super attractive, not just physically, but also more on a broad sense of having their life together and being a good person, would attract a lot of people to try and get with them. And it also stands to reason that some of those people would be interested in a monogamous partnership. What does not make sense is when this same thing happens, except the object of desire happens to be the most stock standard man-shaped entity on the planet. Just a completely unexceptional guy, from appearance to personality to interests and hobbies to skills. Or even worse, this dude is mostly unexceptional except for the fact that they are a mega pervert with whatever the opposite of basic social skills is. Yet, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe more women that might even be directly stated in universe to be way out of the league of the protagonist all glom onto him and try to win his affection. Now, it does not take a super genius to figure out why this tends to happen. These characters are intended to be audience placeholders so that the viewer is able to kind of beam their own identity into the blank slate protagonist and vicariously live out a fantasy where they actually get bitches. At face value, that's fine. Everybody has things that they're into, and everybody should be allowed to explore those particular interests in safe ways. That doesn't mean this stuff doesn't end up being incredibly misogynistic and awkward, especially considering that this doesn't just happen in harem anime or even only anime. And these things are presented as legitimate narratives rather than strictly adult content, a la lemon-stealing whores. A poor high school kid could much more easily see this compared to adult-specific media, and get it in his head that this is what romance should be. And that is probably not great for his psyche, and is also not setting him up for success throughout his life, especially in dating. Before I continue on this point, I want to make it very clear that I take no issue directly with a person enjoying a piece of media that is problematic or has problematic tendencies. I think that I failed to really make that clear in my previous video, which is genuinely my bad. Enjoying something with problematic elements does not automatically guarantee that you're a weird or shitty person. People are capable of enjoying things in nuanced ways. My first 3 anime, no joke, were Black Butler, Soul Eater, and Ouran High School Host Club in that order. I don't know how or why or how I kept watching anime at all after that lineup, but I enjoyed those shows and they still mean a lot to me. I still keep up with watching Black Butler even though I regret it almost every time, and I rewatched both of those other shows since then. If you have watched any of those 3, you know that there are some moments from each that are, let's just say, a little off. I think the deciding factor over whether I can judge you for enjoying your problematic media is whether or not you dedicate your time to defending the decision to have the problematic stuff in there. You don't have to languish on the fainting couch over the corset scene. It is perfectly valid to just try and forget it so you can enjoy your dopamine supplier in peace. But it is super cringy to try to explain why it was actually totally necessary to frame it in the way they did. No, it wasn't. It was weird. Now shut up. I'm trying to listen to my queen. Oftentimes in media, when a woman gets fawned over by 2 or more men— God, this section is so hetero. Can we get Grell back in here? At least she's trans. It'll help. There we go. So much better. Ugh. Anyways, when a woman gets a reverse harem kind of thing going, she's got to at least be exceptionally attractive in universe, or maybe have a family that will improve the social status of whomever she decides to marry, because remember, audience, women's value as humans is determined by their ability to provide you with status. I just love harem anime, can't you tell? But seriously, how come ladies have requirements to be enjoyable by dudes while the dudes have fantasy babes clamoring to get with them, despite in some cases being actually repulsive due to their perverted tendencies? It's the same kind of fantasy fulfillment, is it not? And if it is fantasy fulfillment either way, why is the harem set up so often as a bad thing? Like, if the goal for making the protagonist a blank slate is so that the viewer can insert their own identity and then experience their life through the blank slate, why is it so common in these situations for the protagonist to actually dislike the whole getting hit on by 3 people at one time thing? Is it just so that there's more drama and you can pad out the show? It's probably it, but if not, I have no clue what that's all about. Regardless, I refuse to believe that a person could write a character so bland on accident. Trust me, I have seen some truly terribly written characters in my day, but it's usually that they're unintentionally the most insufferable person on the planet, not that they have no character at all. Look, I know it's not made for me. I know it isn't. That doesn't mean I can't look at the college dropout with negative charisma and discern he has a 0% chance of getting a goddess of love to want to bone, let alone multiple goddesses. And hey, maybe I'd actually like the harem anime genre if there was a little more effort put into making the characters interesting and their actions somewhat logical. Like I said, I like Ouran High School Host Club, and it's basically a multi-leveled harem thing. It's also completely satirical, but that doesn't mean I'm not there for it whenever Haruhi has genuine chemistry with the dudes. I have written love triangles, I love toxic romance plots when handled well, and I even love trashy romance drama every now and again. I am not some kind of elitist asshole that thinks every romance plot needs to be the best of the best in order to buy in, but I don't think it's a crazy position to have that if you're selling a fantasy, you could at least make the price reasonable. Surely you could give the protagonist one personality trait, just one. I'm genuinely done with this topic. I know this will be the shortest section, but I quit the harem stuff so quickly every time I give it a shot, and I don't even have enough examples. So I'm just gonna get to the final thing. Probably for the best. I'm already on page 13 at this point, dear God. Oh.
You were the chosen one!
This one is probably going to be my most controversial section, which is why it's at the end. Well, unless a bunch of people are just obsessed with zombies. Or unless I get another crowd that gets upset when you point out blatant misogyny in the media they consume. But yes, there is definitely something that irks me about the concept of a chosen one protagonist. They're born with or come to inherit some kind of mystical ability that means they're capable of crazy things and just ahead of the curve without having to do anything on their own, really. Let me first say that, unlike most of the other things on this list, this isn't something that typically takes away from my enjoyment of a piece of media. I can get bored of zombies, I can get upset at sloppy writing, and I can get irritated at the unrealistic antics of anime characters, but there's really nothing that's wrong with having your protagonist being the chosen one or being born with some special power, at least as far as I'm concerned. I'm not against the concept on its surface. My issue is with the execution and how it can often make the protagonist far less compelling. Maybe I just have a proclivity to root for the underdog, but I do much prefer watching a character start from a very low position and fight and scratch against the grain to get their way to greatness through hard work and grit. That usually comes hand in hand with a lot of character depth and especially a lot of character agency, which can really be lacking in our special power-having heroes. These guys tend to be almost exclusively dependent on their special trait that they maybe did not do anything to earn to solve their problems, and many of their problems end up being directly related to learning how to use their special trait, or the responsibility put on them due to them having said trait. Sure, I absolutely adored Tangled before I realized my favorite character was voiced by a face-eating leopard, but Rapunzel to me is much more of a passenger in her story compared to other Disney ladies like Mulan or even Mirabelle. Rapunzel has plenty of identifiable character traits that make her charming and interesting, and she is pretty self-sufficient and clever for a girl who grew up in an isolated tower, but the climax of the film, the emotional height of it all, has nothing to do with those things. She just randomly turns out to have magical tears. I'm not trying to discount how beautiful and emotionally powerful the scene is, or Rapunzel's bravery and selflessness in choosing to submit to Gothel if it means being able to save her true love. Insert Sora, Donald, and Goofy sadly watching the scene from the window. That's me. POV, for real. But Mulan saved China because she was a genuine girl boss. No magic needed, like the weird chi thing that they did in the stupid remake that they filmed next to concentration camps. Gee, I love that Disney is so obviously and genuinely evil, but they are too big of a monopoly to stop them, including with laws against monopolies. Anyways, it's also oftentimes hard to relate to the conflicts that these characters are going through because plenty of these stories are just showing the characters suffering from success. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we can't relate to the struggles of super people or half-demon princes or mega-powerful mages of light because they just so happen to be supernatural. Magical powers have not and will never get in the way of my finding a sense of familiarity with Sora or Okarun or Megami or any other anime boy that I identify with. However, if the struggles of the characters start to revolve almost solely around whether they can use their power responsibly, I feel like I start to lose the grip of the character in some instances. Like, oh darn, your hero chose you to inherit his powers, making literally all of your dreams come true in one action, but yeah, I guess it's kind of tough that you need to actually commit to the hard work you agreed to do, and also have wanted to do your whole life. I feel so super bad for you, I guess. I'm not saying it can never make sense, of course, and I absolutely empathize with the concept of people expecting a really high standard from you even if it's not realistic. But the thing is, this isn't a very good one-to-one equivalence to draw with any skills people have in real life. You're not a smart 5th grader expected to be bringing home A's. You're an adult who was named immortal for a reason. Granted, I don't know what it's like to be immortal or to be able to fly around or to have superhuman strength, but I do know that my existence would probably be better served helping people that are not immortal or able to fly around or have superhuman strength than to run off and go into hiding with my fiance who is almost 1,000 years younger than me. I liked you better when you were a gay man in the zombie show, Mr. Marquand. Also, yes, I'm going to be more harsh towards the immortal for his actions than Mark, and it's not because of Steven Yeun bias. At least not entirely. I don't know why so many viewers of Invincible act like they are on even ground in terms of the level of responsibility that they should be able to handle when Mark started off the series as a part of the teen team. The teen team, guys! You'll have to forgive me if I don't expect a teenager to have the same level of maturity of someone that's been kicking around for at least a millennium. Also, as of 3 minutes ago at the time of writing the script, I found out that Invincible is renewed for a 4th and 5th season, so I will be sitting pretty back on track. There is something to be said about the compellingness of a character that takes an impossible tasks not because they want to, but because they are the only one that can. That would be a very difficult reality to be in, to know that you're not allowed to live a normal life anymore because everyone else found out that you can be used for something. That's honestly pretty tragic, and yes, that even goes for the immortal. Okay, I don't hate the guy entirely. That being said, once again, I feel like it can really take away from the character. I like characters with lots of depth, and in situations like these, you end up with characters without much depth. Sure, it's not their fault in universe. They don't get a chance to develop themselves because they're treated as a tool and not a person. Still, as much as that sucks, that doesn't mean it's fulfilling to read or watch or consume in general on my end, and this is only going to be worse if the character in question is the main character. I am infinitely more invested in plot lines that focus on the Chosen One aspect actually bringing more problems to their lives than the super abilities could ever make up for. And not just in the form of how they're expected to use their powers to help people because it's the right thing to do. No, I mean like with how Aang was robbed of his childhood because his status of the Avatar was revealed to him far sooner than it was supposed to. And how people actively hunt him down so they could do genocide without his interference. That shit is actually a great way to handle the Chosen One kind of concept, at least for me, because in a lot of cases, revealing their supernatural powers is not something they can do most of the time if they want to be safe. The Chosen One main character has a habit of getting ridiculously overpowered to the point where it's not interesting to watch them do anything anymore, so putting limits on them is actually a really great way to keep the character dynamic. They can't just bust out their epic devil mode murder move anytime they want, so confrontations get to remain pretty tense, and they have to get creative and develop unrelated skills to get by. I guess my hero did get that right. At least in the beginning. I never watched anything past season 2, womp womp. I don't know. Again, this one isn't something that always annoys me. It just really holds the potential to make me annoyed. Yes, it's super hard that you can fly. Get over yourself. Do you know how much better my life would be if I could just fly around? It gives me the same vibes as those movies that are like, okay, but actually it's so hard being hot because everyone makes assumptions about me. I'm not saying hot people can't or don't have problems, but having people treat you differently based on your appearance is not a unique problem for conventionally attractive people. Your problem isn't being pretty, it's just misogyny. Okay, I've officially said the dreaded M word 3 times now, which means I've probably summoned somebody bad, so let's wrap this thing up with a quick fan art feature. Jeez. I am going to show off 2 artists today who I both feel bad for because I just changed my persona's design a little bit. I really should put out an official reference sheet. I've been working on one, but I kind of want to have a few built-in outfits for people, so just in case they want to mess around with it. I guess I'll take the opportunity to say that I am completely fine with you guys experimenting with different outfits for me, and in fact, I encourage it. You're still drawing my persona, and that's awesome, and I kind of would like to see what you come up with. Anyways, first up here we've got a piece from Aki Norpa over on Instagram of my trademarked Bubs pose. Unless, of course, this person is trying to trademark my pose for their own, in which case, how dare you? On a real note, I feel genuinely called out, both in the limp wrist holding something and the peace sign. Call it a bi cliche, call it being neurodivergent, or call it both. But whatever you call it, I really do have the weirdest hand posture. I also just really like the way you drew the mouth here. It's just such a fun shape, and it makes me happy to look at. Thanks so much to Aki for this lovely fan art. The second artist is Fish Dude Man Guy over on Blue Sky, great name by the way, and they literally made a 3D model of my persona. This is unfair. I was gonna do that for a video. Granted, I wasn't gonna do that anytime soon because Junior, my laptop, would sooner combust than run Blender for more than 30 minutes, but still, for real, this is not only insanely impressive to me, considering the teeny amount of experience I've had with 3D modeling, but it just looks really cool. I love the blocky shapes, and the fact that you drew on the face in post gives it a really unique effect that I wish was incorporated into more projects. I love blending 2D and 3D art together. It always looks cool. Mwah! Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fish Guy. As always, links to the artists are down below in the description. Go spread the love. It is once again time to say thank you to my channel members who you can see scrolling by on screen now. They go above and beyond to support me and this channel, which allows me to invest more time and energy into making cool videos like this one. You can also become a channel member if you have an extra $2 lying around every month. You'll get access to a couple perks, including getting your name on this scroll here, getting access to some behind-the-scenes community tab posts, as well as some cute custom emojis. And at long last, I'm done yapping. Thanks for sticking around this long, and I really hope that my general improvements for the channel were noticeable improvements. Obviously, I have a new intro and outro background, and I've got new talk sprites, but I hope you also noticed that I got a new mic. I have definitely noticed in the little bits that I've already edited. When I first started getting traction on this channel, I told myself that it probably wasn't gonna go anywhere crazy, and the only point that I'd even start to think about investing back into it, like building more visual assets for myself and upgrading my equipment and such, was 30k, a number I chose because of its lack of realism to me at the time. And then I hit 30k, so I pushed it back to 50k, but now I'm here with over 67k, so the upgrades were a little overdue. If I can afford to be a little cheesy at the end of a ranty video like this, I am insanely thankful to you all for getting me this far. I know I say thank you a lot, but I really don't ever want to become one of those content creators that stops being grateful for my audience. You guys are awesome, and I really mean that. You all are kind and thoughtful and supportive to each other, and to me, and I really appreciate it. I can only hope that I can continue to foster this type of community, and I can't wait to make more stuff for you guys with my fancy new mic and my fancy new sprites. Enough sap. I'll let you go now. Until next time, make sure you drink plenty of water, consume some art that doesn't annoy you, and most importantly, remember that you matter. Bye. Bye. Mwah. Mwah.